Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the joint Ways and Means and Appropriations hearing on the Cohen 2.0 bill. We will be taking our witnesses in one moment, but first I want to give a chance to the Vice Chair from Appropriations, Delegate Mark Chang, if he had any opening comments.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman Kaiser. On behalf of Appropriations Committee Chairwoman Maggie McIntosh, we do appreciate the opportunity to join Ways and Means Committee in hearing the blueprint for Maryland's future revisions. It was an honor for the Appropriations Committee to work with Madam Speaker Jones and also the Ways and Means Committee last year, and also the writing the video. And we look forward to working on the revisions this year. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you so much. We will start with our speaker, the Honorable Adrienne Jones, who will be testifying first. Thank you for joining us today, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. We're with both committees, right? Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser and Vice Chair Chang and the members of both the Ways and Means Appropriations Committee. I'm here today in support of House Bill 1372, technical revisions to the blueprint for Maryland's future. As the committees know, we overrode the vetoes on the blueprint for Maryland's future last month. The blueprint is a 10-year roadmap to improve public school education for every child in the state, regardless of what zip code they live in, regardless of their background or regardless of their income. Together, we spent the better part of 3 years working on this plan so that every child in Maryland could succeed. Before you today is legislation that will update the law to better align implementation dates and reporting requirements based on the original blueprint legislation, but also establish a specific funding formula in the foundation formula for student technology to provide digital devices for more students and broadband connections, as well as track federal COVID-19 funding and data from the local school systems based on what has happened over the past year. House Bill 1372 also establishes programming for tutoring and supplemental instruction for students that may need remedial help to get back to grade level after the past year. With me today is Rachel Heiss, who can answer questions specific to the provisions of the bill. I urge the committees to give a favorable report to House Bill 1372. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think now might be a good time for questions. We have Ms. Heiss before she has to go to the Senate hearing on this same issue. So want to open this up for members for questions on any part of the bill, any technical parts of the bill. I'm seeing no questions in this moment. Ms. Heiss, though, we may come back to you as some questions are asked later on. All right, we'll move on. The next person signed up. We have Allison Perkins Cohen from the Baltimore City Public Schools Chief of Staff.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Great. So thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be here to speak today about HB 1372. Good afternoon, Speaker Jones, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. It's good to see your faces today, even if just on my screen. I never thought I would long for the days of hours upon hours in committee rooms, but actually I do. I'm the Chief of Staff of Baltimore City Schools and happy to be here on behalf of Dr. Santelises and our Board of Commissioners to express our support for HB 1372. In addition, I would be remiss if I didn't thank all of you for your leadership in last year's historic passage of the Blueprint for Maryland's future. Your actions and commitment were important and have only increased exponentially given the unprecedented events of the past year and the subsequent impact on public education that is still reverberating and will for years to come. HB 1372 seeks to ensure smooth implementation of the Kirwan Commission's priorities, namely to ensure that every young person in Maryland, regardless of zip code, has the opportunity to reach their full potential. As you know well, it has now been more than 4 years since the APA's adequacy study for the Kirwan Commission that revealed that city schools needs an additional $358 million annually to ensure an adequate education for Baltimore students. Similarly, an analysis conducted by the state's own DLS found that the inflation factor if it had not been eliminated from the current Thornton formula, an additional $290 million would be going each year to Baltimore's children. What's more, in addition to the dramatic underfunding of operations, city schools' capital challenges were fully documented in the Jacobs report in 2012, which provided a complete review of our facilities and concluded it would cost $2.5 billion to bring all city schools buildings up to minimally acceptable standards. Adjusting for inflation, we estimate that overall cost to be $3 billion today. We can't wait any longer. We're grateful to see HB 1372 reflects the same urgency we feel as we imagine the road ahead that's going to even be longer after the pandemic. Specifically, the bill recognizes the need to accelerate resources to districts with the highest concentrations of poverty in several ways. It ensures that even with the year-long delay, schools with 80% of poverty will still receive the per pupil grants starting in FY22. It increases the amount of those grants in the first year of implementation from 12.7% to 16%. It reduces the span of time needed in order to reach 100% of the grants from over 9 years to 7 years. These are really important provisions, and as you prepare to deliberate on the legislation, we hope you will uphold and even potentially expand those provisions by further accelerating implementation of the per pupil for concentrations of poverty and the full phase of Kirwan. Before I close, I want to share that we expect to have some technical changes that we'll be requesting. For example, the bill's restriction of no more than 4 students per small group of struggling learners for transitional supplemental instruction would increase the cost per student by about 25% for us. Currently, there's research on tier 2 interventions that suggests that group sizes of 4 to 6 is effective to maintain fidelity. And so the imposition of a 4-student rule would force us to follow the choice of either serving fewer students or sacrificing fidelity to the evidence-based intervention due to adjusting the time frequency. We respectfully ask that you request that you look into that. And we wait until we hear DLS's analysis today before sharing the entirety of our amendment request. We'll get those shortly and respectfully urge you to support HB 1372.
All right, thank you. We'll take a few more witnesses and then we'll take a round of questions. We next have John Willems.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Willems representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. I'll be brief as we're also joined today by Tammy Fraley, my president. I want to emphasize that MABE strongly supports the immediate passage of this emergency legislation, consistent with the need and the much discussed needs to make technical corrections, extend certain implementation dates, address declining enrollment in the September 30, 2020 count, to address the digital divide in a meaningful way with regard to foundation funding, and to include the provisions related to summer school and tutoring to address the paramount needs of students arising from the COVID pandemic. And for those reasons and all of the reasons underlying our strong support for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Act overall, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willems. And then we next have Tammy Fraley from, I believe, also from May, but I think from Allegheny County. Is that correct?
That's correct. Hi, I'm Tammy Fraley. I'm the current president of the MABE, which is the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, and I'm also serving in my 5th year of 8 years on the Allegheny County Board of Education. As you're aware, MABE represents all the local boards, and we strongly support the immediate passage of this emergency legislation. You have our written testimony, but we would like to thank you and all of the legislature for committing to the success of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. Nearly 1 million public school students across the state deserve to benefit from all the amazing work and that has been accomplished with the focus on early childhood education, continued high quality and diverse teachers and administrators, access to college and career pathways, and state and local resources. MABE and our members continue to believe that local boards will be the best in guiding the ship into the port with the guardrails that you align. So thank you. Have a great day, and we urge a favorable report for HB 1372.
All right, thank you all so much. We'll go with some questions. First with the Vice Chair, Delegate Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this bill, Madam Speaker, and everyone else involved. My question was for the Chief of Staff for the Baltimore City Schools, if she's still here. My question was about the direct tutoring. Can you just explain that a little bit more, how you're using those dollars now? And you mentioned something about the best practices for that. And I wonder if you had that more in detail that you can send to us, but more so along the lines of what you're doing now, because my understanding is that the funding is supposed to be used for direct out of the classroom tutoring, out of classroom direct instruction or tutoring. Can you just speak to that a little bit for us? Thank you.
Yeah. So we are doing small group tutoring outside of the classroom to help address gaps we're identifying and catch students up, accelerate students. And so we've been doing generally 1-to-5 a ratio. The research I was pointing to indicates that for that type of intervention, a group size of 4 to 6 is most effective to maintain fidelity. We've been doing about 1-to-5. As currently proposed, it limits it to 1-to-4. And so we just feel like if we have to make that choice, it's going to either implement the amount of time before students or the frequency of the dosage, as opposed to, we think we can effectively do it within that research-based practice of between 4 and 6. If you just limit it to 5, we would be happy. That would make it a lot easier to reach more students in a research-based way.
How are you tracking students who are learning loss? How are you tracking learning loss for students currently?
Yeah, so we're using iReady test to look at students' progress over time. We have instruments for each of the subject areas to kind of look at individual student loss, and then are assigning students to tutoring based on that. We applaud the committee in terms of its use of tutoring as a really important, especially for acceleration, an important way to catch students up. And we'll be we've been using it and we'll continue to use it, particularly working with with colleges and using young people to tutor other young people. So college students is a really effective way, almost peer-like tutoring. It can be really effective with the right training to make sure that you're catching students up. So we've been using that, and then using the assessments in classroom to identify those students who need the gaps the most. And attendance data is another one too, because there's a huge correlation with attendance data and students who are behind. So tutoring is an essential investment, and we'll be doing a lot of tutoring. We just want a little bit more latitude to be able to do it more effectively.
Can you send the committees the tools that you're using
Sure.
to assess learning loss? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
From the Appropriations Committee, Delegate Kittleman's recognized. If you're going to mute yourself, do you have a question, Delegate Kittleman?
I do apologize. I have a question as well for Ms. Perkins. I need to ask how the funds from the Cohen bill are going to be able to improve the school system. And the reason I ask that is because we already spend among the highest amount of money on schools in the nation, not the highest, but in the top 10, we actually have 6 counties in the city in the top 10 for per pupil spending. I think Baltimore City at one point was at the highest in the spending on administration. And I like plans, but there have been so many articles and there's been so much publicity recently about the problems in the city. And one of the comments was that back 2016, the city put together a lovely plan, excellence in equity. And yet now that the 5 years has passed, very few of the suggestions have been accomplished. And it seems that the kids in many of the schools are being passed without learning anything. And it's not limited. It's gone back for a number of years. And I don't mean to be critical, but I really want to see why you think that this is going to work.
Sorry, I'm on mute. So a couple things. So one is that the information that sometimes the media reports about the ranking of school districts is incorrect. So it's inaccurate data. So it talks about the fourth highest, being the fourth highest school district in the country, and it is referring to information about the top 100 school districts, the large urban school districts. In large urban areas, the salary rates tend to be higher, and the correlation between per pupil is highly, like in Maryland, highly correlated with salaries. So when there's high salaries, there has to be high per pupil to pay for that, since about 3/4 of most school systems pays for salaries. That's only the top 100 districts they compare it to. When you actually look at all 13,000 school districts in the country, Baltimore City ranks 2,400th in the country. So not the highest by any stretch. And when you compare us to other jurisdictions, Maryland in general has a very poor track record in terms of actually putting resources where the poor students are. So Ed Trust did a study that said nearly half of Maryland's Black or Latino students attend schools in one of the 3 most underfunded districts in the state. In 2018, the Hechinger report said that Maryland is one of 6 states where the wealthiest 25% of school districts receive more money than the poorest. In 2017, the Education Law Center said that Maryland's funding system is among the most regressive nationwide for its failure to provide additional funding to school districts with higher concentrations of low-income students. And Baltimore's per pupil funding is lower than the average in all of Alaska, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, Wyoming, and the District of Columbia. So first of all, the funding information that is reported in the media is not good information. Second of all, in terms of the Augusta Fel Savage incident that I believe you're talking about, that is not the result of reporting on the part of Project Baltimore. That came to light because of our own work that we did in 2019. So in August of 2019, we did an analysis in the summer of transcripts that summer of student report cards, preparing for the summer graduation like we always do. We identified irregularities in some of the course scheduling there and students who were behind. As a result of that, we initiated an investigation and we immediately suspended the principal and the assistant principal and put an interim in place. We then did a comprehensive transcript review of all students in that school. We sent a transcript review to every parent in the school, giving an update on where they were in their progress. We offered parent-teacher conferences for parents who wanted to talk about their child's progress. And we did home visits. In the summer of last year, so after that, we then put a permanent principal in place and stuck with our strategy that we put in place across the district, which is we put our highest performing principals in the schools with the highest needs. So our transformational principals, which is part of our teacher contract, we tend to place those in our schools with the highest needs. So we put a transformational principal in that school this past summer, and she has assiduously following up with the families who were identified in that transcript review as needing support and doing home visits. And it was one of those home visits, one of many home visits and calls that spurred that particular family to reach out to Project Baltimore. So I just want to correct the record about in terms of where that came from. It's actually the work that we've done with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and our work over time to track students and put together a plan in 9th grade and follow them. There is a deep relationship. There's a Northeastern study that just came out recently about the correlation between school funding and student outcomes that by their own conclusion puts to bed the argument that there is any debate about whether school funding is correlated with outcomes for students, because it is correlated. There's questions about how you invest it, but it's definitely a strong correlation.
All right, thank you.
Just one follow-up, if I may.
Sure.
I'm sorry, Madam Chairperson. Yeah, I wasn't talking just about that incident. There have been other things, such as 6 schools where the kids, none of them passed the standard tests. Before that, there was something about 13 schools, and I can't remember the exact specific, but it's not one incident, it's over and over. And we tried money back in the 13 years and didn't see any change. And I guess what I'm saying is, how can we have some measure of outcomes where we see kids actually improving and learning? Because we haven't seen it for 40 years.
So actually, I would just disagree with the premise of the question. Baltimore City actually has seen increases in its performance, and it actually in the last couple of years where there was state measures, were some of the increases that we're seeing in Baltimore City were some of the higher in the state in terms of progress made and from Park from one year to the next. We still have a long way to go. Delegate Kilman, I will be the first to tell you that we have a long way to go, but there has been a lot of progress. We've seen progress in terms of the number of schools that are moving students by 10 or more percentage points and in both subjects. So we have seen progress across the district. So we have a long way to go, but we have made a lot of progress. And again, there's a huge correlation between progress and investment. So that the funding formula you talk about was never fully funded, as you know. So the own estimates by the state's Department of Legislative Services, it indicated in 2016 that we were being underfunded by $290 million a year under the current formula. And the analysis for Cohen indicated that we're underfunded again in 2017, I think, by $358 million a year. So I just don't think it's reasonable to argue that investment that has not been happening in Baltimore City, that wouldn't make a difference. That clearly would make a difference in terms of ways students are funded and the amount of supports we can provide to struggling learners or to address attendance issues like the case in the recent Project Baltimore story.
Well, I thank you for the answers, and I'll keep my fingers crossed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Go next to Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is more so, and anyone can take a stab at answering it, but I'm trying to reconcile what the bill does with the fiscal note. So if everybody could take a look at page 20 of 25 in the fiscal note, it looks like the goal of the bill is to try to soften the blow of COVID and also Kerwin being implemented. Obviously, some jurisdictions are going to be able to handle this better than others. But I like all the things that you've described about broadband, per pupil, student to teacher ratios. There was a number of really feel-good things that were listed in the bill. And the fiscal note is very lengthy for what we're used to looking at. This committee generally is generally formula driven, which is to say that we look at different matrices, and then based on those matrices where the different jurisdictions fall, we'll get more assistance or less assistance from the state, and then the counties obviously kick in the remaining amount. But when I look at this fiscal note, it looks like out of the roughly $70 million that will be given to offset for the jurisdictions, roughly 77% of that money goes to Baltimore City. And there's actually 17 jurisdictions that will receive no benefit from this bill, which is to say 0.0. So in a formula-driven world that we live in, I didn't see any, if this then, or how you arrived at those numbers. Why is Baltimore City getting 77% of these funds, and these other jurisdictions, 17 of them, are getting zero because they've all suffered these same issues. And some of these have high concentrations of poverty as well. So I'm just trying to understand the numbers, if somebody could address that.
Good afternoon. It's Rachel Heiss from Legislative Services. I'm happy to try to answer that for you. Exhibit 5 that you're referring to in the fiscal note is not the full impact of the bill. It's just one small piece of it, which is related to under the current law, which is Kerwin is now current law, or the blueprint is now current law. Starting in fiscal 22, every county is required to fund the local share of all of the formulas. Right now, they only have to fund, or prior to right now, they only have to fund the local share of the foundation. And so that was a large increase in local funding that is going to be required starting in fiscal 22. What the bill does is it says, because of the circumstances and the timing and the fact that the state funding of the new formulas isn't in place for fiscal 22, it pushes off that requirement to start in fiscal 23. And Exhibit 5 is just showing where counties would have had to put up more funding in fiscal 22 that won't be required to in fiscal 22. But actually what you want to look at for the full impact of the bill is on page 22. It's Appendix 1. And this shows the state increases or changes, I should say, in state funding under the formulas to the various school systems from fiscal 23 to fiscal 30. Due to the timing of the bill taking effect, none of the fiscal 22 formula funding is mandated. And so the impact starts in fiscal 23. And you can see there's small increases statewide in fiscal 23 and 24 that are related to excluding the fall 2020 COVID-19 enrollment drops from the new rolling averages, so school systems will get more funding because we're going to kind of skip over fall of 2020. And then beginning in 2025 reflects the increase in educational technology funding that is being phased in, that goes out to the school systems. And you can see that gets fully phased in by fiscal 27. And so that the Appendix 1 is the change due to the bill and the formulas.
So just as a follow-up, are those funds that are listed in the Delta going to be offset by this bill? Because I'm still trying to connect the two dots here on the top line fiscal note on page 1 versus what you have referred to here as page 22.
So page 22, the numbers on page 1 for fiscal 23 through fiscal 26 are the exact same numbers that are on page 1 for the state impact. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to the next two people testifying. We have Cheryl Boast from Maryland State Education Association.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Chang, Speaker Jones, and members of the committee. On behalf of the Maryland State Education Association, our over 76,000 members, I want to thank you for the passage, not once, but twice, of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, so we can begin to deliver on the promise of a quality education for all students. And I especially want to thank Vice Chair Delegate Washington for his superb job as a floor leader in seeing through the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. It is very important to the investment in public education. And these changes that you see in House Bill 1372 are critical to making not only what the speaker said, some technical changes in the dates because of the initial veto, but also as we address the pandemic. We are offering support with some amendments. The amendments are to increase equity in the quality of recovery programs for students. This bill can help facilitate the best possible academic recovery program for students through ensuring high levels of individual attention for students, as we see in the tutoring and summer school opportunities. But we feel it's best to be done by the educators who know them best and those that are working in their schools, whether that is our para educators, our teachers, and other folks. So we do offer some amendments so that those can be the people who provide the tutoring and the summer school support. We should also take reasonable steps to protect the physical and social emotional health of educators and prevent their jobs from privatization. So we would ask for no outsourcing on these positions and also make sure that we keep our health and safety provisions in place and not only focus on the academic needs of our students, but also on their social emotional needs. And then we would ensure an equitable and predictable implementation of the blueprint and its funding. And so we offer some small amendments on the concentration of poverty phase in and the free and reduced price meals summer school amendment. Overall, we are in support and thank you for putting this forward and ask for a favorable report. Sean Johnson will get into more of some of the amendment details. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. Sean Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Good afternoon. Sean Johnson. I'm the Executive Director at the Maryland State Education Association. Pleasure to be with you all, and thank you for bringing this bill forward. Just to piggyback on what President Bose had to say, if you do look at, we were able to submit some written testimony just in advance of this hearing that attempts to detail several areas for amendment. I'll just address them quickly. One is around preventing outsourcing. That is something that President Bose mentioned. Obviously, is important to make sure that the professionals who are working with students are employed by the school district. So there's a specific reference for an amendment there. The other in the back, the new parts of the bill, the new sections of the bill that look at summer school and the transitional supplemental instruction. Again, as President Bose said, I think there could be more, we think there could be more specificity added to the bill to make sure that as we bring students back in the summer, that we're still mindful of the health and safe learning conditions that are necessary for those students, that we are mindful of building conditions as well. If we're expanding summer school and we're bringing students back into buildings without adequate air conditioning and whatnot, that could be a problem. So some of there's amendment language to address that. When we get into some of the expanded work on social and emotional supports for students, we also know that these committees have recognized the impact of the pandemic on educators as well. And so ensuring that those services are available for everyone in the education community, students and educators alike, are part of our series of amendments. Third, in the area of assessments, there is a lot of new testing that's added to this bill, pre and post tests in advance of, as part of summer school or tutoring. We think those tests should be developed by school districts or the teacher themselves, not Secretary Cardona in DC or Superintendent Salmon at the statewide level, at the district or teacher level. And then finally, as President Bose
Mr. Johnson, your time.
If I'll just summarize, at the very end is around advancing the funding for the concentration of poverty on a faster scale. These students that need the most help cannot wait an additional 4, 5, or 6 years. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. And then next we have Shanetta Martin from Advocates for Children and Youth.
Thank you, Delegate Kaiser, Delegate Washington, and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today about House Bill 1372. My name is Shanetta Martin. I am the Education Policy Assistant Director at Advocates for Children and Youth. We are the independent statewide voice for children in our state. We are also a proud member of Maryland Education Coalition, the Blueprint Coalition, and the Maryland Alliance for Racial Equity in Education, and stand together in support of this bill. We also support the recommendations from those groups. I'm here to build on those recommendations and will speak to 3 considerations related to long-term implications of distance learning during the COVID-19 pandemic. Those 3 considerations are: 1, opportunities and supports for 9th grade students; 2, broadening behavioral health supports to include social emotional learning and connecting physical health; 3, equitable distribution of Blueprint funds along with protecting and preserving those funds and growing them. To the first point, supporting 9th grade students, we ask that in addition to collecting data on course failures to ensure on-time graduation, that you will add collecting data on attendance rates and suspension and expulsion data. Research shows that 9th grade students who fail 2 or more courses attend school less than 90% of required days, and that have more than 2 suspensions or expulsions are off track to graduate from high school. Tracking early warning indicators, which are attendance, grades, and behavior, in combination will provide the full picture of what types of interventions are needed to support struggling students and get them back on track to graduate. We also suggest specifying reporting on tiered interventions that address issues across the full 9th grade band and at the group and individual levels across all high schools. Second, as federal stimulus dollars will come in, please consider broadening behavioral health supports to include
Ms.
social.
Martin, your time is up. You're in favor of the bill with amendments? Do we have your?
Absolutely, I am. And I did send in a written testimony, so you have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Ms. Bose, Mr. Johnson, and Ms. Martin? All right, thank you. Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't know you were coming to questions. So, Mr. Johnson, thank you so much. You know that one of the things I concern myself with is testing. I'd just like you to elaborate a little on what you think the current tests might look like and how they might impact instruction, if you would, please.
Thank you. Yes. So I do think there are really good assessments that are in place that teachers are already using that get almost immediate feedback back to them to inform instruction. And that is our point, that any assessment should be used to inform instruction, in this case, maybe even to reflect the effectiveness of some of these summer school or tutoring programs. But it shouldn't be a brand new level of state standardized testing. There are MAPS testing, DIBELS testing, some of these things that are more in the teacher vernacular that depending on grade level might be appropriate. And so for a given tutoring program, a teacher could select the test that would be appropriate for determining that. For some of these summer school or broader district-based programs, Delegate Ebersol, I think the local board of education could be the entity responsible. There can be standardization, but sometimes that phraseology, and it's actually written 3 different ways in the bill as to what those assessments might be. Sometimes that phraseology can scare people off to think, oh no, here's another Pearson branded national test that we've actually in Maryland have done a better job to get away from. And I hope that with some of this amended language, we can be clear about that one more time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Novotny is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for the panel here. Are there tutors outside the public school tutors that might be capable of doing this tutoring, or are they incapable of doing the tutoring, not as good, or what's kind of the sense?
So right now, most of our school systems for any type of tutoring do use their school system employees because the programs are usually developed at either the school or the district level. And for us, we believe this builds continuity with students, but as we're expanding this program, it's going to take more individuals, and we want that to be offered to employees that are currently within the school. If I'm, as a 4th grade teacher, if I'm tutoring 3rd graders in the summer, or I'm doing summer school with 3rd graders, then I've built that relationship, I've built that rapport, and I have a knowledge of where they will be academically and social emotionally by the time I get them then in 4th grade. So it sets up that transition. We just want to make sure that it is our employees of the district.
Yes, ma'am, and perfect segue to a follow-on. So if you're having a hard time getting through to a student, when you continue to have a hard time, maybe a different approach or a different person outside the system could give a different light?
So as a Title I teacher who I've done summer school programs and after school programs, one of the things that I'm trained to do is to do differentiation of instruction. And so I've even had students who have been retained in my own classroom. In the 2nd year, we've been very successful because as a teacher, I use a variety of tools. So if one isn't working, I'm going to go to another tool or use another system to reach each child. So I don't think it's necessarily that somebody is going to be better than what I'm doing, and that gives me an advantage for them teaching them during the school year.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The committees will now hear testimony from Shamoya Gardner, Strong Schools, Maryland.
Good afternoon, Chairs Kaiser and McIntosh, Vice Chairs Washington and Chang, and members of the Ways and Means and Appropriations Committees. For the record, I am Shamoyan Gardiner, Deputy Director at Strong Schools Maryland, urging this committee to report favorably on House Bill 1372 with the following amendments. The first three are on funding equity. First, do not delay the development of a new methodology to calculate the number of students experiencing poverty in schools. The current undercounting we know disproportionately hurts students from families with undocumented or mixed residency status in the United States, primarily folks who are Latino, African, and Caribbean immigrants. These are the children of the very same adults who may no longer be eligible for the EITC benefits you all fought so hard to extend, and there are intergenerational consequences to failing to act here. In the vein of resource equity for communities of color and communities experiencing poverty across the state, refund the concentration of poverty personnel grants at the levels passed in HB 1300 and do not decrease the phase-in of weighted categories in the formula. Clarify also that the fiscal trigger provision in the bill is either conducted annually or clarify the conditions under which the funding increases can resume. The vagueness that we have right now could create conditions to politicize the implementation of the blueprint further down the line, which we know empirically harms already vulnerable school communities. Minimize standardized testing to MSCA's point, and I'll leave it there. As far as systemic shifts are concerned, please consider using this bill as an opportunity to create a reporting structure for the state board and the department to share information with the general public about the use of federal dollars that are directed to local school systems in this bill. Finally, we do remain concerned about the relative authority of new and existing oversight bodies like the AIB and state board and how that delineation may negatively impact the ease of implementation and benefits for students. Ultimately, House Bill 1372 is necessary, makes many changes that we did not mention here today, and we urge a favorable amended report.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gardner. The committees will now hear testimony from Rick Tyler Jr., Maryland Education Coalition. Rick Tyler Jr. with Maryland Education Coalition.
Thank you, Delegate Chang and members of the committees. My name is Rick Tyler. I'm the chair of the Maryland Education Coalition, a coalition of 20 very diverse and very experienced organizations advocate for children statewide. And we speak favorably of this bill. We originally submitted some written testimony in a rush to get a response in the original due date, and we will be offering a few amendments. I just want to highlight a few things quickly. As previously said, we're very concerned about the decreases in funding for ELL, special ed, and compensatory programs. These are the groups of students that were most impacted by the pandemic, and we believe instead of decreasing the funding, that the funding and the timeline should be sped up and not slow down and decrease. Secondly, we have some specific amendments concerning summer school tutoring and transitional supplemental instruction programs based on evidence-based practices that were brought to us by several of our members who have extensive experience in operating in the research-based programs. Therefore, we will be offering a set of amendments that are evidence-based and proven to work and we think are best for children, including new evidence on what's best for teaching students to read. Thirdly, we have a concern with the accountability language in the, for the AI board about desegregating data and the collection of their data. And we believe that there should be some stakeholder oversight or input or advisory capacity on these issues to review this because we believe—
Tyler, if you could please summarize.
Yes.
Thank you.
Lastly, I'll just say that MEC is very strongly supportive of the bill. We believe there should be stakeholder participation in the decision-making process consistent with ESSA and other language within state policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tyler. The committees will now hear testimony from Clara Botstein with Bard Early College.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Clara Haskell-Botstein, and I'm the Associate Vice President of the Bard Early College, a 20-year-old national network of public early college high schools operated through a partnership between Bard, a nonprofit liberal arts institution, and public school systems. Our network includes a campus in Baltimore, Bard High School Early College, Baltimore, established in 2015 in partnership with Baltimore City Public Schools. We're very supportive of the blueprint and HB 1372. This testimony focuses on the college and career section of this emergency legislation and a requested amendment. For context, Bard Baltimore offers students across the city of Baltimore, the vast majority of whom are low income and underrepresented in higher ed, the opportunity to earn 60 transferable college credits and an associate's degree in liberal arts and sciences from Bard, alongside a high school diploma, completely free of charge. We are deeply grateful to the state of Maryland and the General Assembly for its support, which makes the tuition-free early college education possible. Early college high schools like Bard Baltimore and other dual enrollment programs are an evidence-based solution for improving college access and success. We applaud the Cohen Commission and the champions and the General
I have had to talk about it
for
a lot.
recognizing the benefits of early post-secondary pathways and including them in the blueprint. The need to redesign high school and build a better bridge to college and careers is now greater than ever, as academic instruction and college exposure have been disrupted by COVID-19, and at-risk families have been disproportionately impacted by the resulting health, economic, and education crises. HB 1372 presents an important opportunity to help students recover lost instructional time and stay on track for their grade level. For students in high school, that's college and careers. To that end, we recommend that HB 1372 include college and career readiness pathways, including dual enrollment, as part of the encouraged activities in summer school programs. This will help students prepare for post-secondary education through authentic college exposure and the opportunity to earn transferable credits. To facilitate this, we recommend that the summer program partners include institutions of higher education licensed in Maryland among the list of partner options. Without innovative evidence-based opportunities for at-risk students in particular to accelerate, the widening achievement gap will not be narrowed. The blueprint clearly recognizes the importance of early post-secondary pathways that position students to thrive in life after high school. Incorporating these pathways into the summer school programs is an opportunity to begin expanding the opportunities at scale and ease
Thank
an
you, Ms.
increasingly
Botstein. If you
challenging
could please
transition.
summarize, please.
Yep.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, I'm happy to, we'll submit amendments, but that's our hope, that these pathways are incorporated into the summer school programs.
All right, thanks. Any questions for the last three people who testified? All right, we'll move to the next few names. We have Frank Patanella from the ACLU of Maryland.
Good afternoon, chairs and members of the committees. My name is Frank Patanella, and I'm a senior education advocate for the ACLU of Maryland. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. We represent a class of plaintiffs in the Bradford versus the Maryland State Board of Education lawsuit, which is actively being litigated to ensure that the constitutional rights of Baltimore school children are fulfilled. We appreciate the time and effort being put into overhauling the state's education funding formula and policies related to education programming for all students in Maryland. There's a lot in the blueprint bill to be excited about. And in this bill's revisions, we agree with the omission of the enrollment count for school year 2021. We also agree with the increase in the foundation to account for digital and technology needs in the out years. And we agree with the increase in the percentage of the per pupil concentration of poverty dollars in the early years to fast track funding for students that need the most support. The increase in state funding for education for the FY22 education budget by the legislature, coupled with the large infusion of federal dollars through the CARES Act 2 and 3, will put school districts in a much better position to address the impact of the pandemic in the near term. These measures will also help districts begin to address the chronic and significant underfunded funding caused by the long-lasting and compounding effects of the cuts to the Thornton formula that happened over a decade ago. The amendment that we are seeking in this bill has to do with the midterm and long-term implications of the blueprint funding formula and whether or not it will meet the state's constitution's standard for funding adequacy. We oppose the reduction to the weights for the students that qualify for compensatory education and ELL in the original blueprint bill, and we oppose the further reduction to the weights in this revision. Also last year, we questioned whether or not the special education weight was sufficient. The projected funding for special special education for Baltimore City schools 10 years in the future barely meets what is being spent by the district now. Lastly, the development of the Blueprints funding formula mostly happened over a 2-month period at the end of 2019, and not many details are known about how the foundation and the weights were determined. To ensure that students in
Mr.
Maryland
Patanella,
receive, yes.
Time is up.
Okay, just to close, we ask for an adequacy study to ensure that the formula meets constitutional adequacy. So we urge the committee to accept this amendment and to vote favorably for the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. We next have Catherine Carter from Let Them See Clearly.
Hi, my name is Catherine Carter. I'm from Let Them See Clearly. I'm a vision and student health advocate. And I am favorable with amendments that we need to fully address our students' behavioral health in this bill. When we kept our students home in an effort to protect all of us from the virus, we not only disrupted their education, but their access to health care. Due to COVID, students are not only facing an educational crisis, but a health crisis. Because of COVID, whether due to quarantine, loss of income, healthcare, many students have been disconnected from local health providers. Students have missed well checks, vision and hearing screenings, dental care, mental care. Lack of behavior health is having a significant impact on our students' physical and mental health, which directly impacts their social, emotional, and academics. As students return to the classroom, schools should coordinate with local health providers and community sources to close these gaps, especially for schools that lack a school-based health center or a community school. I'm asking to amend the bill to task the Behavioral Health Consortium to form and meet immediately to start addressing the COVID impact on our students' behavioral health. Also task the consortium to create best practices for schools to follow when they develop plans to address trauma and behavioral health issues due to the effects of COVID. Also, have them develop a public awareness campaign to encourage parents and students to connect and reconnect to their local health providers. Create a hearing and vision subcommittee to address the grades that were missed and are continuing to be missed due to COVID, and improve the follow-up and access to doctors, eye exams, and glasses. There's a lot of kids who have increased myopia due to lack of outdoor play, and increased screen time is what they're finding with COVID. So in ending, I'm asking that you consider not just the academics of a student, but the whole student. A healthy student means healthy mind, healthy body, healthy smile, healthy ears, healthy eyes. If we want our students to succeed, then we need to help ensure that the behavioral health needs are addressed. I call on all the lawmakers here and all of the education advocates here to work together and with health advocates, providers, and community resources to address the health crisis that our
Carter,
students are facing due to COVID. Thank you.
Your time is up. Next, we have Kalman Hedelman from one of our fellow Kerwin Commission members. Thank you. Buzzy, good to see you.
Thank you very much, Speaker Jones, chairs, vice chairs. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm an independent education analyst and had the honor of serving alongside the chairs and Majority Leader Lukey and Speaker Jones and Vice Chair Washington on the Kerwin Commission. You have given more than your fair share of blood, sweat, and tears over these many years, and this blueprint revision bill is another strong step in the right direction, and I applaud you for that. I particularly want to commend the provisions that seek to strengthen accountability. Accountability, accountability, accountability. I know members of these both committees have been gnashing their teeth for years over their inability to get sufficient transparency and responsiveness in the implementation of the programs that you enact. I'll spare you the details of the 4 amendments I've submitted, but they basically seek to strengthen the accountability provisions that you have in the latter sections. As you know, if you don't tighten the language, education officials at the state and local levels will be hard to pin down, and we need to pin them down on implementation. Just 2 other very brief notes. One, I think it might be recognized that the Cohen Commission and the Blueprint got a head start even before the COVID on tutoring and interventions for struggling learners. These kids who are suffering now were far behind before the pandemic, making the work before you even more important. And the other thing I want to note, however gratuitously, the Bradford lawsuit, if it is decided, whatever it was will be decided, will have statewide implications. It's a case that would seek to strengthen adequacy and equity for all students, not just the students in Baltimore City. So again, I thank you all very much for all you're doing to rise to the occasion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Edelman. Any questions for any of the three who just testified? All right, seeing no questions, I'll pass things back over to the Vice Chair from Appropriations for the last three speakers.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The committees will now hear testimony from Charlamar Douglas with MAREE. Charlamar Douglas. Laura Schultz with Decoding Dyslexia Maryland.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair Kaiser and Vice Chair Chang and members of the committee. My name is Carlene Spatulnik and I work with Laura Schultz and we're both members of Decoding Dyslexia Maryland. In 2019, I spoke with you along with students, teachers, and school psychologists in support of the Ready to Read Act, which thanks to this committee and the General Assembly became law in 2019. Decoding Dyslexia Maryland supports House Bill 1372, but would like to offer an amendment to align the transitional supplemental instruction with the Ready to Read Act for struggling students in grades kindergarten through 3. Transitional supplemental instruction is part of the prevention framework established by Ready to Read. A prevention framework is helpful because if students who are at risk for reading difficulty are identified early, students, parents, and teachers get the benefit of time to provide effective evidence-based instruction and time for students to master the material. MSDE is currently preparing Ready to Read implementation guidance and COMAR regulations for local school systems that include supplemental reading instruction. We feel it makes sense to use the Universal Reading Screener as the pre-standardized assessment to determine which students should receive TSI and to measure student progress. Progress monitoring, which districts should already be conducting, can be used as a post-standardized assessment. Ready to Read requires reading screening for grades K and grade 1, and proposed COMAR will add grades 2 and 3. There's no sense requiring additional standardized assessments for K to 3 on top of the screening and progress monitoring that is already part of schools' prevention framework under the Ready to Read Act. Aligning these laws will save the department and local school systems time and money, and they won't need to buy or develop new assessments specifically for TSI. My written testimony includes the text of the proposed amendment. And with that, I thank you for your time and ask for a favorable report.
Thank you very much, Ms. Spatulnik. Next, we'll hear testimony from Michael Sanderson with the Maryland Association of Counties.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the two committees. I'm Michael Sanderson with the Maryland Association of Counties. Appreciate the opportunity to speak and compliment the letter of information that we submitted on the bill. I'll try and focus just on three things that affect county governments specifically, and I'll do my best to stay in my lane. We're not offering amendments to the bill, just some perspectives on these things that affect counties. Number one, the timetables, especially FY22. I think this bill does that the right way and basically pulls 22 off the table, starts things in earnest in FY23. I'm glad to hear most stakeholders are on board with that framework. A second issue is partially in this bill and potentially in the budget that the Appropriations Committee is dealing with. I want to address the funding web that has arisen from federal funds showing up for schools and the odd circumstances of this pandemic. I think counties would attach ourselves to the point of view from your professional staff who have said it's worth having some reporting and transparency on what's happened in local school budgets for the budget year we're in now and the one ahead, just so we can see what's happened there. The most substantive thing I'd like to address is the September 2020 enrollment dip. Basically, at the state level, the governor said, let's apply some hold harmless funds to keep that from affecting school funds. Makes sense. There's a hold harmless requirement that counties show up with their own hold harmless to get that. That also makes sense as long as you have the third piece, which is in this bill. And I think it's done in an elegant and sensible way. And that is FY22, which is based on the enrollment count from this last fall. We know that enrollment count was peculiar. It's an aberration. And the way this bill deals with that is just skip it. Leave it out of the calculations. That's the right way to do things. And that keeps the counties on board for the year that's ahead of us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanderson. And one last time, checking to see if Charlemagne Douglas with MAREE is here to provide testimony. Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. That's the last of those testifying. So if there's no other questions from members, I think both committees have some announcements. I have them from my respective subcommittee chairs. Delegate Washington, are there meetings? Are there voting session in the next day or two?
Yes, Madam Chair, the Education Subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee will meet tomorrow following the floor session for a voting session.
All right, and Delegate Barnes? I can't hear you. I think it's 2 o'clock tomorrow. Not yes. Okay, awesome. And then any of our subcommittee chairs, any others? All right.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
probably Wednesday. We'll schedule around other people, early childhood.
Back to you, Mr. Vice Chair, Delegate Chang.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman Kaiser. For the Appropriations Committee, as a reminder, today the full Appropriations Committee will be having a full report out at 5 p.m. And to all the members to please watch our email boxes for the subcommittee reports and any necessary updates. On behalf of House Appropriations Committee Chairwoman Maggie McIntosh, we thank the Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to have a joint hearing on this.
All right. Thank you all very much. I think that's it. See y'all tomorrow. Take care.